Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Country Education Partnership Pre-Professional Development Program, the Winter Series. My name is Brendan Ryan. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Country Education Partnership acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Victoria and Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Today's session is the third session in the winter series with a focus on adaptive leadership and risk management. It's my pleasure now to introduce the Chief Executive Officer of the Country Education Partnership, Mark McLean. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Brendan, and thanks everyone for joining us and to our speakers today. Just one update today. Last night, CP held our fourth session with a group from the Irish Education Department around their Small Schools project. And if you simply Google Small Schools Project Ireland, you can learn about this initiative. So over there, they class small schools as those with 4 full-time mainstream teachers or less, which is probably pretty equivalent to Victorian model. That makes up 44% of their primary schools, so a lot of small schools there. One thing we're quite interested, they run a online PD program. I'm sure it's not as good as ours, but they're looking to share sessions with us, and we'll sort of inspect a few to make sure the cross-country side still resonates. But that their program, it's written as OIDE, but it's pronounced IDGA, and it's the Irish word for teacher. But when you read it, just sounds, the Aussie term is oi, but IDGA is what it is. So we're looking forward to perhaps on our website being able to share some sessions and them looking at some of ours. With the time difference, unlikely they would ever join live. I think it's 5, 6 in the morning right now. So anyway, that's some of our small schools and classes that we're really excited by. So back to you, Brendan.
Thanks very much, Mark. Normal housekeeping, arrange and supply today. The session will take exactly 1 hour, include by 5 p.m. The program is being recorded, so you can review the session online at any convenient time in the future. And I might add, all past sessions are also available online. Anyone who has a question, could you include that in the chat box? And we'll continue to check that chat box during the session, and we'll endeavour to answer any questions that arise. And a reminder that before the end of the session, we ask you to complete a short survey. We need the feedback concerning the session, so please make sure you do complete that survey before checking out today. Now, I'll hand over to CEP Manager Morris Billy, who will introduce the guests and facilitate today's session. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Brendan, and welcome everybody. And for those who might catch up on the recording later on, hope you enjoy this afternoon's session as well. People often ask with podcasts and videocasts, sometimes that the chat off screen is more interesting than the stuff on screen. Well, today I can tell you that being in Victoria, the chat was around weather. And so nothing that exciting, but I think anywhere in Victoria, we're experiencing rather icy, wintry conditions. So the winter series is aptly named today. It's exciting that we've got 3 great speakers with us this afternoon. In a little while, we're going to hear from Nicholas Oddy, the Director of Leadership Resilience Group, and a bit later on, Stacey Harper from the Victorian Institute of Teaching. But first up this afternoon, it's very exciting that we head up to the Mallee, where we welcome Ben Nicholson from Werrimul P-12. And Ben is, I don't know whether Ben wants to call himself an expert in this field, but I know he's done a lot of work in the area of risk management and managing school council. I had a look at Ben's website earlier today, and I must say I was very impressed with the way that was presented and the language and the focus on students and wellbeing and community. So, Ben, it's great to have you on board today, and really looking forward to your presentation. So I'll hand over to you for starting us off.
All right. Thank you, Morris, and thank you for those kind words. I'll start sharing my screen for everybody. So I guess I started a conversation between Mark and I started around how I was looking to manage some of the risks in my school. As a new principal coming to a small school, I'd identified some challenges. But I do have a background of working in business and sitting on boards as a director, and part of that is really strong lens of looking at risk. And I wanted to apply some of that thinking to risk in schools to kind of think about managing it on a broader scale than perhaps what we consider in schools generally. So in this presentation, I really want you to be thinking about, what are the risks to your school? And how might you use some of these frameworks to think about how you can manage those and also make sure that you're moving forward successfully. So I guess, from any risk perspective, we always talk about our known knowns, the risks that we probably plan can happening, the known unknowns, the things that we might be coming along, we're just not sure when they're going to come. But there's also those unknown unknowns. And there might be some people in your organisations who do know those unknowns, and perhaps you as the manager of the organisation don't know those. So it's really around trying to think about really broadly what are those different risks so that we can think about how we might manage them. And when we're thinking about risks are not necessarily always around bad things happening. We have risks, especially in small schools, of missed opportunities, perhaps funding lines that we don't apply for, perhaps opportunities for students to excel or exceed, those sorts of things. So risk is not always the negative, and I want you to think about risk as also being missed opportunity. So for risk management in schools, the department sets out requirements for schools to identify and manage risks. We think about those commonly in terms of child safe policies, in terms of our emergency management planning, in terms of our occupational health and safety. And there's some really great resources. The more you dig into the Department of Education, the more you see. And I think there's a really good video around the 3 lines of defence that the department's produced, and it's quite old, but it really sets out how those different elements work together. The 3 lines of defence model talks about the first line being your staff in the school, the second line being those sorts of supports and policies and resources that we might have to support us to do a great job external to the school, and the third line of defence being the audits, the independent assurance that we're actually got these things in place, and we're getting some feedback from outside of the organisation. And these are the things that are put in place for us in schools in lots of areas. Perhaps there could be some other areas where we might want to consider risk and do our own internal audits around some of these risk processes, such as seeking funding. I'm going to start this video because I think it really illustrates the point, and hopefully this plays well for everybody who's watching.
The 3 lines of defence is a model that outlines the ownership, accountabilities, resources and governance for risk management activities. It's a key component of the Department of Education and Training's accountability and reporting model.
Taking risks creates opportunities, allows innovation, helps us to deliver education services to the community and helps us achieve our department objectives.
But risk needs to be managed. And we all have a role to play, so it's important we understand how it works. And what are the 3 lines?
The first line of defence. These are the functions that own and manage risk. That's basically all of us, management, staff, executive officers and principals, all acting with integrity to achieve our objectives. We're accountable for the decisions that we make or don't make within our areas of responsibility. We should all identify risks and escalate them to the relevant body or person and be responsible for implementing the corrective actions needed to address any process and control deficiencies. You're probably already doing this at work. You just didn't know you were a line of defence.
The second line of defence. These are the functions that provide specialist support and guidance for first line of defence staff. These functions provide strong and clear advice and policies. They help monitor and build risk management practices. They provide support and training, and they identify known and emerging trends, issues, and risks. Second line of defence functions include finance, human resources, integrity, procurement, legal, communications, information management and technology, emergency management, and risk management.
And the third line of defence. This is the highest level of independence and objectivity and is provided by a robust internal audit function. It assures that the department's financial and operational controls are operating in an efficient and effective manner. Where weaknesses are identified, they will recommend options for change. This is the function that provides independent assurance that risk management and the internal control framework are working as designed.
There is a great deal of interaction within and between the three lines of defence, and each line of defence can't exist without the other. All are needed to provide the rigour of effective risk management.
Let's think about a working example of the 3 LOD in operation for a procurement. The first line would be the branch undertaking the purchase of a new corporate management system, ensuring it is in line with departmental objectives, budget and financial delegations, and procurement procedures.
The second line is procurement, risk management, finance, legal, information management, and technology functions helping support and advise those who are undertaking the procurement.
And the third line is internal audit. During the project, they may conduct an audit of progress or assess the effectiveness of internal controls. Once the project has concluded, audit may also review the project.
3 interconnected lines of defence work together to ensure better outcomes for us all.
For now,
So I guess this really, for me, helped to understand that in order for us to have really great risk management, we need to think about who are the people like in the school who are working with that? Where do we get supports from the right policies and the right frameworks? And then how can we actually audit those processes? Many of which are done for us, but there may well be some others that you need to consider in your school setting. We're very good at the OH&S and the emergency planning and those sorts of things, but there are other opportunities. So as the world becomes more volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, we might want to consider some more context-specific risks. Things like, what's the risk of declining enrolments to this ongoing viability of a school? What's the risk of a school's reputation in terms of attracting staff or students to look for positions or work in your school? A framework that I used with some of my staff is around some of exactly that, some of that uncertainty about our school. My school where I started really lacked some clarity around the viability, around the financial viability and ongoing enrolments. So we needed to get some understanding and get some feedback and perspective and refine a plan which we felt was going to manage that risk going forwards. So I guess for you, it's around what issues do you lose sleep over as a school leader that aren't already covered in some of your risk management processes? Some useful questions to identify risks are: what might happen to prevent the achievement of objectives? What have we thought about? Who can cause it to happen? How quickly can it happen? Who can prevent it? How can we stop it? And what can we do to minimise damage? Do we have existing processes or procedures in place for this? My scenario was around declining enrolments. We were worried that enrolments might decline to a point that it impacts our capacity to deliver high quality programs. staff perceived or actual operational inadequacies might cause that. It can happen in a short time frame, and it's our school staff, community and leadership can do it through community engagement plans, high quality provision of education, marketing and promotion strategy. And I was pleased that Morris identified the website as being attractive, because that's all part of my risk management plan. And who can minimise the damage? Well, it's around the staff's training, the recruitment, maintenance and budgets, those sorts of things. So in terms of a process, we can use existing deep frameworks to really unpack those different risks. But the challenge for us is to be able to identify them in the first place. So my challenge is, what are your risks beyond the ones that we're already managing? And can you apply the existing Department of Education frameworks around those risks to be able to unpack what's context specific for you? What can you put in place in terms of the people in your school? What supports can you seek from the department or from external to look at policies or people that might be able to provide advice? And then how do you audit that and keep on top of how you're going with those controls for those risks? And how do you build that into your regular review and evaluation with either internal or external audits, so that you can make your risk management processes really robust beyond being just emergency management, but been thinking about it in terms of the risk of missed opportunities, the risk of reputational damage, or risk of poor communication, risk of uncertainty in your workplace. And I think using that lens, you can really use risk for a positive and a productive way to sort of plan forward and reduce that uncertainty in your school, which makes for a school a better climate. So I've found this a really useful process, and we're in the process of sort of evaluating right now some of the things we put in place to manage risks in my school over that first 12 months. So I'm happy to take any questions around any of those slides. Morris?
Thanks, Ben. I just wanted to go back to something you mentioned right at the beginning and sort of at the end there about that concept of missed opportunity. And it sort of reminded me of a couple of conversations I had earlier today with some organisations who are not directly involved in education, but work outside the education system and support education. And I guess there are more and more of those organisations and bodies out there. And the questions always come up about approaching schools who are very busy, have got a lot on their plate, but these organisations and players have a lot of information, and it can be around funding, it could be around programs, it could be around assisting in specific curriculum areas. And I'm wondering if you have given thought, is there a way that those organisations in our school system can work closer together in that space, so that that information can flow back and forth in a productive way without putting too much pressure on our schools?
Yeah, and I guess a risk that I've identified is that in terms of being a small school, many country schools are small schools, is that I've missed out on several lines of funding that I should have. And that's around staffing and the allocation of my role and what I'm prioritising. Sometimes I'm in the classroom. I think it is the value of organisations like the Country Education Partnership or local principal networks to be able to really, I guess, distill the really important messages or the important opportunities that need to be lifted up into that priority order to make sure that those opportunities aren't missed. There are initiatives like the Small Schools programs, which are supporting schools to get those funding for different parts. But yeah, I think it really is in the value of the networks that we create, like the Country Education Partnership, like our own principal networks and conferences, to be able to get those messages through those opportunities.
And without going down a rabbit hole, I did want to ask you about whether you've given much thought and much discussion around the risk around AI in our school and education system, and the positives and negatives in that space in terms of risk management, because I guess it's an area that a lot of people are grappling with across the board. Have you got some initial thoughts or quick thoughts about that before we move on?
My thoughts are that they are both a risk and an opportunity. I think we would be crazy we would lose an opportunity to do a blanket ban and say we are not going to engage in AI. We do need to do it in an informed way and just be all over, I guess, the the management around that is knowing what the Department of Education current policy is, in terms of no to deep seek, yes to some things, which ones can we use, which ones can't we? And then setting up some processes around doing that in a really thoughtful way and using the tool for good and how it can be used. Because I think it's naive to think that we won't all be using AI or replaced by AI in coming years in a lot of the facets of the work that we do.
Yeah, I think that's a good snapshot, and we could certainly talk a lot more about this subject, but thank you for your presentation today. It's great. I don't know if anyone has a quick question in the meantime before we move on, but we've also will have time for questions at the end, hopefully. So thanks, Ben, for that. We're going to move on to Nicholas Oddy, the director from the Leadership Resilience Group, talking about adaptive leadership in education. Nick, it's great to have you on board. And I don't know whether you're going to discuss it a little later on, but I did notice that one of your clients on your website that you listed there was the CFA, and I would be interested to know what that work looks like, given everything that the CFA has gone through over the last few years, but maybe that's for another time as well. So Nicholas, thanks for joining us, and I'll hand over to you for your presentation.
Terrific. Thanks, Morris. And I'm happy to talk about the CFA because I've worked with them as a client in leadership development, but also as a volunteer. So a really interesting organisation, but for another time. So today I'm going to talk about the employee commitment spectrum, and I'm deliberately using that language and differentiating it from work-life balance, because I almost think with work-life balance, sometimes there's an implied assumption that if you're working more than 38 hours a week, you haven't found that balance, which I don't necessarily think is the case. And so what I'm talking about here is an individual's commitment to their self, to their own sort of needs, their own career and their own well-being, and then balancing that with a commitment to the organisations that they work for, being that a school or the department, or a commitment to students and to educational outcomes. So as a way of background, I've been in leadership development for about 20 years and about 12 with the Department of Education and Training. In 2020, with some extra time on my hand, given the COVID pandemic, I actually developed the Leadership 360, a feedback tool for leaders in all walks of life, but I've used that extensively with the Department of Education and Training. And what I want to talk to you about today is explicitly a new element that I've developed and added to that 360 tool, which is about this notion of an employee, particularly within education, finding that balanced commitment. But just quickly in terms of the tool, there's those 4 dimensions of leadership that the tool measures: leading self, capabilities, functions, and people. And finding that balanced commitment really sits in that leading self sort of quadrant, ostensibly about, I guess, resilience, but also about authenticity and bringing your whole self to work and looking after your needs as well as the needs of the organisation. So the tool looks at these 16 dimensions of leadership across the bottom of the page there. It doesn't matter if you can't read them. They're fairly standard fare, anything from authenticity, communications to building relationships. But importantly, it looks at a self-rating that the individual leader undertaking the tool presents, and then an average of raters who provide feedback to the individual leader. And that piece is really important in terms of that self-awareness. And we often have some insights in terms of, is the leader seeing their leadership and perhaps their resilience and well-being and their balanced commitment in the same way as their observers are, their manager and colleagues and other people that work with them. So that's the first piece. The tool also provides a breakdown on a self-rating and then a manager's perspective, as well as the perspective of a number of raters. And the manager perspective, I think, is really important, because if we are talking about a balanced commitment and looking after the well-being of the individual and also the well-being of the institution, the school or the students, I think the manager plays a key role in helping an individual leader or a teacher or a staff member to find sort of that balanced commitment. So that's the background in terms of the 360, but really what I want to talk to you today is about this new element that I've built. And I've created this employee commitment spectrum just because I was seeing with so many people that I've been coaching, and my business partner and colleague as well, so many people that we've coaching where self-sacrifice becomes the norm, and they're prepared to sacrifice their own needs and their own career and at times their own well-being for the good of the institution or good of the school or the good of the student. And that's very noble in many ways, but it comes at a cost. And so what this tool seeks to do is to help leaders and to help individuals find that balanced commitment. So this spectrum, I know it might be hard to read with the small font. On the left, there might be an imbalance towards too much self-interest and an individual that prioritises personal gain or advancement or their own agenda over the needs of clients or schools or colleagues. I see less of that in education, but I do see that in other organisations. At the other end of the spectrum, you might see a bit of an imbalance towards too much commitment to the organisation, which is what I see more of. So to read the language there, the individual might prioritise organisational needs, client or student needs, and their well-being at the expense of their own sort of personal well-being, work-life balance, career advancement, or whatever that might be. And this tool and the self-awareness that ideally it helps generate and the coaching that accompanies it is really designed to help leaders in school and individuals in school find that balanced commitment between organisation and self. So just to read that top line, an individual effectively balances work and personal life, prioritising both organisational goals and their personal well-being. And I see that a lot of times that people do have that natural balance, and that's great. But what I see a lot, particularly in education, is a bit of that self-sacrifice and that imbalance where people are putting the needs of the organisation or the student or the school or the community, particularly in regions and in country Victoria, ahead of their own needs. And as I say, it comes from a noble place, but it has some consequences. Just in terms of how the tool works, both the leader themselves or the individual undertaking the 360, their manager and their raters, looks at a number of statements and ranks the statements based on what they're observing and what they're seeing most often. So again, I won't read them all, but if the one under strong organisational commitment that may be a little self-sacrifice is a statement like places the organisation's success and well-being above personal interests. And if you're seeing a lot of that in the 360 coming up, it's an indication that there's a bit of an imbalance. The balanced commitment statement strives for a healthy work-life balance while maintaining high levels of productivity and commitment to organisational goals. And again, that's a little of the ideal. And then sometimes, again, not as much in education, you see an imbalanced commitment to own needs, and it might be a statement like engages in self-serving behaviours that may harm the organisation and its people. So looking at the 360 results, the coach and the individual, the recipient of the 360, will see how these statements come up in terms of what people are ranking. And it's nice if it demonstrates that there's that balanced commitment there. But what I'm often seeing in organisations, particularly in education, is a bit of that self-sacrifice piece and a strong organisational commitment, often coming at the expense of the own individual's needs. So what we try to do is work with an individual to identify what would an ideal balance look like, where you're still fully committed to the needs of the organisation, the school, the students, the community, but you're also committed to your own needs, to your own values and living your values, to your own well-being, leveraging your strengths in the work that you do, to your own growth and development over time. And how can you find that balanced self or that balanced commitment where you have that inner and outer harmony, you're aligning your personal and professional development needs and really working in a flow state that can come from, as I say, leveraging your strengths, doing work that's personally meaningful and important to you, and then also delivering great outcomes for students, for schools, and for our communities. And through coaching, we seek to help people to find that. And as I say, in education, often we're seeing a bit of an imbalance towards the self-sacrifice and a commitment to the organisation's need over their own individual needs. So again, without reading all of these statements, if the balance is nice, you get that inner peace, that the balance enables people to navigate workplace challenges with that authenticity and that grace and humility that does justice to their own needs and does justice to the needs of students, schools, or community. So that's the overarching sort of tool that we've created and the intent. I want to do a little deeper dive just quickly into where this self-sacrifice comes from and what an individual might do, what their manager might do, what other colleagues might do in order to first recognise a bit of self-sacrifice in the extent to which sort of people are committing to the organisation and the well-being of others, but at personal expense. So it's often unseen, but if we're watching closely, we do start to notice the sense of self-sacrifice that might be happening in an individual and the consequences of that. It's often seen or can be viewed as a noble act in the first interest, but becomes a double-edged sword when practiced without unhealthy boundaries. I actually think the culture in education quite often invites or almost expects a little bit of self-sacrifice. You're committed to education, you've signed up for a career which is about the well-being and the growth of others, ostensibly young people, but other individuals. Yeah, and I say that I think that part's fine when the self-sacrifice comes at a personal expense and then cascades on, so there's expenses for the individual or for their institution or for those that work around them. That's when it becomes problematic. So generosity is commendable, but true compassion must extend to oneself, as continuous self-neglect ultimately undermines both the giver and the relationships they seek to serve. And I think that's a really interesting part of this, that it's obvious to us all, I think, that self-sacrifice can harm the giver, but it can create relationships that aren't highly functional relationships, that aren't balanced relationships. And so ideally, not for just for the sake of the individual, but for the sake of their sort of colleagues and for the stakeholders that they serve, we really want these balanced relationships. And I will talk to what that looks like. I just wanted to talk to some of the negative consequences associated with unhealthy self-sacrifice and what that might look like and how we might become attuned to it. So it can lead to a loss of self and a neglect of our personal needs. What are my self needs, or do I have that inherent self-worth as a human being, or does that only come through serving the needs of others and delivering great outcomes to other people? That loss of self can be part of the equation. You can create this resentment. So subtly, on some level, individuals themselves are self-sacrificing, but there's a level of resentment when there's an imbalance in terms of commitment and effort and how much an individual might be contributing to the overall sort of goals of the institution. Chronic self-sacrifice can lead to burnout, that exhaustion, that cynicism, that sense of being overwhelmed, and it can harm interpersonal relationships. Others can become overly reliant, boundaries blur, authentic connection can suffer, and that underlying resentment, those unmet needs of the giver, can compromise the relationship in time. So, and then the obvious one, I think the fifth one, is the prioritization of others' needs inadvertently cultivates this unhealthy dependency in the recipients of the self-sacrifice. It might be at an individual level, it might be at a collective or cultural level. We start to rely, because we're often under-resourced as schools or institutions, we start to rely on those that are providing that level of self-sacrifice, and there's almost a dependency that ensues. So it is incumbent on both the individual, their managers and the people around them to identify if is unhealthy self-sacrifice sort of present and what can we do about it. And so I'll get to a slide in a second about what we can do about it. Just to talk quickly, that source at the end of the page, there's a great article in Psychology Today, published last year, called The Double-Edged Sword of Self-Sacrifice. And when I read that, I thought, I really am observing this in education. And it's something both for the sake of the individual, both for the sake of organisations and the outcomes they deliver to students that we want to address. And we're going to find this sort of healthy balance, or this healthy commitment to self and others. So just a statement here, self-care, establishing clear boundaries, is an act of true compassion and prevents the negative spiral of resentment, burnout, leading to healthier relationships and genuine connection. So often in coaching, we're talking about self-care, and we're talking to the individual about the inherent self-worth they have, and they don't necessarily need to serve the needs of others and deliver those great outcomes in order to have that sense of accomplishment or that sense of worthiness. And that's an important part of it. And so then finally, I really wanted to sum up with what can leaders do, or what can colleagues do? And it's slightly different between the two parties if they're observing this self-sacrifice and this imbalance in commitment for the sake of both parties. So for leaders themselves or managers, initiate a private conversation demonstrating that empathy. It's not blaming, it's not criticism. It comes from a noble place, but recognizing that it's unproductive. Setting clear boundaries and expectations, both for the team who might be taking advantage of the self-sacrifice and for the individual themselves, pointing out how important it is to find that balanced commitment. Provide the resources and support necessary. It might be EAP. It might be partnering people up if they've got similar sort of dispositions that they are self-sacrificing, so that they can support each other to understand the costs and consequences of doing that, and then strategies they might pursue to find that balance. And then importantly, leaders to model healthy behaviour and a healthy balanced commitment themselves. Then on to colleagues. What can colleagues do? Again, express that genuine concern, and in private, because sometimes this can be sensitive and confronting for people to recognise that there's unhealthy self-sacrifice at play. Gently encourage boundaries and self-care. Avoid feeding the self-sacrifice cycle. If you're dependent on it, if you utilise, I guess, or the beneficiary of some of that sacrifice, how can you stop doing that or break the cycle, and then escalate if necessary and appropriate, and bring other people in to support it. So let's say teaching and education is a really noble profession, and so many people come in with that sort of altruistic intent to help others and to deliver great outcomes for students, schools and communities. But when it comes at the expense of their own needs, there's a consequence of that for self and others. And the little model that we've developed here, that's the intent, to help people find that balanced commitment and deliver great outcomes for numbers of stakeholders. So I might stop there and take any questions or any comments.
Thanks, Nicholas. That's really, really interesting. And I do have a quick question, but I think, Mark, you had something you might have wanted to throw in. Mark's one of our more recent people who have been in a leadership role at a school as a principal a few years ago. Mark, did that strike with you? And have you got any questions or comments?
Thanks, Nick. And I guess the answer to my question is sort of probably in that point number 2 on advice to leaders. But just want to ask you, small school principals, when they first begin in the role, can often make a rod for their own back in regard to financially supporting through the professional development budget in the school their actual own development, where they're very reluctant to spend any money on their own PD. They tend to focus on the other staff in the school, and then to get to a point where they feel a bit funny about going to school council and suggesting something. I'm just wondering, is there a suggestion you'd have to, their early interactions with school council around professional development as the whole staff, including themselves?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. The early days, we're creating patterns, and those patterns often dictate, the way we work and the way we either focus on our own needs or the needs of others. So I think it's particularly important in the early days of principals to bring this into awareness. You've got to, half the way to solve a problem is to bring it into awareness and to acknowledge there is a problem. So how can we help principals in those early days recognise that it comes from a noble intent, but we might set up those unhealthy patterns, and those unhealthy patterns are embedded in self-sacrifice, and there's going to be consequences for those. So how might we sort of educate and support them to say, looking after your own needs, and you're fully entitled to the same professional development and the same support mechanisms that you're offering other people. So how do we bring that into awareness? I think that's a role for the Country Education Partnership to do that, and then to, as I say, establish those healthy patterns from the word go that will often, or hopefully, sort of create a foundation for that balance, for you to look after your own needs as PRINs, but also the needs of your staff and stakeholders. Really good question, and I absolutely think it's true. And as I say, there's almost an expectation that comes with the turf, that comes with the role, and I think that's something we need to address and confront.
Thanks, Nicholas. Just a quick follow-up question before we move on. The question of the story of balance is interesting. A previous organisation I worked for, we spent a lot of time in leadership discussing this work-life balance and balance in the workplace. And it would surprise you to hear that people have very different opinions on what the correct balance looks like. And I'm wondering, just have you got a piece of advice for people who are just starting to navigate that issue around balance, particularly when there's that old chestnut of, some principals believe that they have to be the first one in and the last one out, and that's how you set the example. But is there some words that you can share in that space for us?
Well, what works for us is reframing it to commitment, because balance is highly subjective, and one individual's perspective of balance might be different to another. But balanced commitment seems to resonate with people. Are you committed to yourself and your own needs and your own well-being as equally as you are committed to the success and well-being of other people? And what might you do if there is an imbalance there? What might you do to ensure that you are committed to your own needs and your own growth, your own professional development, resilience, whatever it might be? So that reframing, I think, has been more useful for us to call it a balanced commitment rather than that work-life balance was a little subjective. So, but again, a good question and a good point.
Excellent. I like that. The reframing to the commitment part of it is fantastic, and it's a good takeaway right at the end from a really thought-provoking presentation and some really interesting information. So thanks, Nicholas. If we've got some time at the end, we've certainly might have to take a few more questions. I wanted now to move on to Stacey Harper. One of the things I find fascinating about my work is I sometimes find it harder to pronounce or to get the words out of someone's title. So Stacey, I hope I get this correct. Senior Professional Practice Officer, Accreditation and Professional Practice Branch with the Victorian Institute of Teaching. And I think that's you. And
yes.
What I like about your organisation's vision, as I had a look today, is it's really simple but striking, and it's the vision to ensure that Victorian learners have the best teachers. And the term teachers refers to both school and early childhood teachers. I love that it's so simple but says so much. So on that note, Stacey, thank you for joining us, and looking forward to your sharing your insights on your organisation's work.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, we have some big acronyms at VIT. Generally in education, we have them everywhere. So yep, I am Stacey. Thank you. That was correct. Senior Professional Practice Officer. Before I move to my slides, I'll just say that my entire team, our professional practice team of 6 of us, were all registered teachers. So a lot of the work we all do is around mentoring and professional practice. Actually, I'll put my slides up now. There we go. Okay, so in terms of our team, we've actually just gained strategy as well. So our new acronym is, I think, SAPP and P, which is a bit ridiculous, but I think that we've got a growing understanding that professional practice and really supporting teachers and being on the front end of what is quality teaching is sort of the direction we're going as an organisation. So that's really exciting. We've got strategy in there as well. What I'm here to talk about today is actually a program that we've got, a new program, which is the Mentors of Pre-Service Teachers program. We've been doing mentoring programs for a long time at VIT. One that you are probably aware of is the Effective Mentoring program. But this new program is looking at supporting mentors that are working with pre-service teachers. So part of our purpose as well as an organisation at VIT is to make sure that all of our teachers that are registered are highly qualified, proficient and reputable. And when we're thinking about highly qualified, we're thinking about, they've done an appropriate qualification. They've met the requirements of their degrees. So, pre-service teachers coming through, getting really strong mentoring, that they're proficient. And we use the Australian Professional Standards of Teachers to use for that proficiency, and also reputable, so that everyone who is a registered teacher is of suitable character. We think about the role and the responsibility on teachers and on schools that, parents and carers need to be reassured that when they're handing their children and young people over, that they're with the best people to be with them. So, as I mentioned before, we've got the Effective Mentoring program, and we're sort of looking at a continuum of mentoring and thinking about the continuum of a teacher's professional development. So we've been having that Effective Mentoring program, which supports mentors that are working with a graduate or provisionally registered teacher to move to full registration, which is kind of like that, if you think of that driving license analogy, they're sort of on their P plates and they're still developing that proficiency that comes with time to become a fully registered teacher. We're now going a little bit further down, and this is based on some work we've done with the Department of Education, and this being identified as a space that needs more work. So now this program we're doing, it's for 1 day, and it's essentially to bridge that gap. So, when teachers are mentoring pre-service teachers on their placements, they've got an opportunity to do some training that really targets and aligns to those needs. So that's sort of what we're looking at in this program. And much of what I already said, we do the seminars face-to-face in Melbourne. We do them online, and we're also doing them in regional locations. And I'll talk a bit about those in a moment. But what we do is we get into the nitty-gritty of, mentoring context, because a lot of times teachers don't have any idea where their students are coming from. So we talk about, what's going on in terms of the university as well, and what does their degree look like, and this person sitting in front of me and I have to assess them. What does that mean? What does that look like? So we want to make sure that our mentor teachers are feeling confident and strong, and also have that opportunity to build their skills as a mentor, that relationship building, professional conversations, feedback, observations, all of those things. And of course, assessment as well. Teachers have to use their professional judgment to make an assessment to decide, okay, is this pre-service teacher ready? Am I signing off on someone who's ready to go to the next stage in their degree? And that can be a challenge for some people that are new to mentoring, having to sign their name away and say, yes, this person is or perhaps is not ready. And we also look at how can we develop our mentoring skills to be adaptive? So it's really different if we're working with someone from a bachelor's course that's 20 or 21 years old, compared to if we're working with someone who's had previous careers, and they're coming to teaching as a later career, and maybe someone who's about to graduate and is ready to take on the full role of a teacher. So we look at that as well. In terms of how long this program has been running, we did a pilot seminar in Melbourne in 2023, and we had about 16 teachers attend. And that was really helpful for us to sort of, is this hitting the mark? Is this what mentors need? And we adapted the program a little bit in 2024. And we actually ran 9 seminars with 192 mentors attending. We did 4 in Melbourne, 2 regional and 3 online. And this year, because we've had such good feedback, it's continued to grow. So this year we've got 11 seminars, and we've had more of a regional focus as well. This project was always designed to look not only at mentor teachers in metropolitan Melbourne, but also to recognise the significant need for mentor training outside of Melbourne and in the regional areas. So that's why we've actually gone to 4 regional locations this year, as well as online. And what we've done in terms of our online is we've actually really sent out emails and communications to teachers that are in regional locations. So of the 2 online seminars we've already had this year, a large amount of those teachers were coming in from regional locations, which was great to see and hear their perspectives and have them included. So we do have capacity for about 380 mentors to do the program this year. We've had really strong feedback. When we were developing this program, we want it to be useful and targeted, and the sort of PD that what you're doing applies and is useful to take, back to school and be used straight away. So 93% of the respondents said that the program had really supported their understanding of how they were going to support pre-service teachers. 90% also said it really helped them in terms of building their skills to support mentoring. And another 93% had said that, they felt that they could really apply these learnings directly into the workplace. Thinking about the regional locations, so how we decided where we would actually have these seminars, we did some work with the Department of Education, and they've obviously got their Placement Plus program, and they're also providing regional funding for pre-service teachers across regional locations. So in 2024, we went to Shepparton and to Bairnsdale. And it was, again, really great to get out to these locations and meet people and hear those perspectives, which, at times are quite different than maybe in the metropolitan schools. I think you also mentioned before that we do register early childhood, primary, secondary. This program is open to those teachers as well. So, whether they're working in the language school or, early childhood centre, primary, secondary, whatever that might be, any registered teacher is welcome to attend. This year, we've already been out to Ballarat, and we will be going out to Geelong, Mildura and Corranborough. And we haven't officially decided what 2026 is going to look like yet, but again, we'll be looking to the data for that. And I was thinking about what you were saying previously in the commitment of teachers. One thing that's been really interesting this year is in some of our online and our regional seminars, we've actually had teachers, due to workplace shortages and demand, we've had people come back from retirement to become a mentor. So I thought, that commitment is remarkable, and that they've recognised that, where they've worked and the local community doesn't have enough mentor teachers. So they're bringing that expertise back to support the next generation. And I thought that's actually quite remarkable, and what a commitment to the profession. I'll show you a little bit about what is in the seminar itself, but I think the value of this program is also strategic. So in terms of, you know, staffing, workplace shortages and supports and things like that, early career teachers, pre-service teachers, when they're supported well, when they come in to the whole school and they have a mentor that's really supporting them, you know, they're likely to want to stay there. So it can be a recruitment opportunity, because those early initial teaching, you know, experiences and interactions make a huge difference in terms of a teacher developing that professional identity and that sense of professional belonging. So this is one of the slides from the program, going through the sorts of things that we look at. Again, the mentoring context, where are these pre-service teachers coming from? Looking at those skills of mentoring, you know, relationship building, conversations, observations and feedback. We look at the flow of professional experience. What does it actually look like? And then tailoring those skills and putting it all together, looking at individual case studies. So one of the big things that's important for mentors as well is to realize they're not on their own. So one of the activities we do, we use the name IT provider, that's initial teacher education provider, that's a university or other college. We get the mentor to realize the links. And the research shows that the best placements, the best programs have really strong links between the mentor, the pre-service teacher, the university, and the school. So when these are lined up well, that's where quality and success can happen. So, you know, we have our mentors discuss and share and consider, and it's often a really great networking opportunity for them as well to hear from each other and to hear what's going on in other schools or centres, and, you know, to appreciate what a really strong, solid induction and mentoring program looks like within a school. We then also look at a bit of research, and AITSL put out this environmental scan of mentoring last year, and it looked at, actually 2023, sorry, and it looked at what makes quality mentoring programs in Australia, but also across the world. They went to London, they went to Finland, they looked at Singapore, Canada, and what they pulled out were some really key things, and we discuss this in the program. So things like those positive professional relationships, feedback, student behaviour, modeling good practice, making sure when we're having observations and we're having those conversations that we are being evidence-based. So we unpack all of these things together and discuss, and we consider how is this really impactful in terms of when we're mentoring and supporting pre-service teachers. Another thing we do is we get mentors to consider their own professional development. So we want them to set goals for their own practice. Obviously, the focus is on them supporting pre-service teachers, but we really want mentors to appreciate that mentoring is a form of leadership, whether or not they have a title. It is leading and supporting the next generation of teachers. So we get mentors not only to consider, say, the grow model for the conversations that they're having, but also as a goal-setting opportunity for themselves to think about, what is my professional experience? What is my needs in terms of mentoring and professional growth? We then also look at a bit of a continuum. So, you know, there's lots of conversations around what is coaching, what is mentoring. One way to look at it is as a conversation style and a questioning style. And so we get them to really unpack and think, okay, where might I be on this continuum of mentoring or coaching on, you know, in a given situation? So obviously in the beginning of a placement, when someone's starting out, you probably do have to be quite directive, even just the simple stuff of, oh, where's the photocopier? Or, you know, what is the behavior management policy of this school or centre? But then, you know, as a pre-service teacher is developing and they're taking full control and full ownership of the classroom and working with the students, then a mentor's role might shift more into just providing feedback, asking those open questions and reflecting back what the pre-service teacher's doing. So we've got that bit of continuum there. And we often say, you know, to the mentors, that pure coaching zone, that's probably something that's further on in your career. And that might be something you're doing as you go further into leadership. But we probably don't want to be doing that with someone who's brand new and needs a lot more support. We also want mentors to know what to do when things aren't working. So we want them to know that if they're pre-service teacher, there's some red flags going on, they can talk to whoever is the coordinator of placements or professional experience in their workplace or other staff, and they could also talk to the universities. One thing I didn't mention earlier is before I came to VIT, I was a secondary maths and science teacher for about 7 years. And I did also spend a few years working in the university sector directly with pre-service teachers and coaching and mentoring and coming in when things weren't working. All universities, all providers have at-risk procedures, and they want to know when things aren't going well because they want to be able to step in and support not only the pre-service teacher, but the mentor, etc. And, you know, if the decision needs to be made that someone does need to fail, so be it. But, you know, they want to put support in for that. So that's another thing we encourage. That's kind of it for me spruiking the program, but I did want to share upcoming seminars that we have in regional locations. So we've got the Effective Mentoring Program, which is for those mentoring graduates that are already working in the workplace. That's the 2-day program. That those regional locations of Terralga, Wodonga, Bendigo and Warrnambool, we've actually just had that program in those locations just this month. So we don't have them this year, but we will have them again next year. We've got one in Geelong coming up. We've got one in Mildura coming up as well. And we also have PRT seminars. And what they are is a 2-hour seminar for the graduate themselves to come along and learn about the process to becoming fully registered. So we've got those coming up next month, August, and we also have them online. So we do heaps of these across the year. And the Mentors of Pre-Service Teachers program, that's also happening in Geelong, Mildura and Korumburra later in the year. But essentially at VIT, we want to make sure that we're supporting in all the ways that we can. And we've got these programs that, you know, they're free to come to, you know, we'll give everyone lunch. And, you know, it's a really great opportunity for networking and collaboration and I guess to support early career teachers and mentors in their professional expertise. So that's it from me. Questions? Happy to take any questions.
We're nearly out of time, Stacey. You're a membership-based organisation. I think that understands. So that's basically how you fund most of the stuff that you do. It's all through your members and school staff. And
that's right. All of our funding is actually from teacher registration fees.
Yeah.
Yes.
Beautiful. And there's a lot of great information on your website, so I encourage people
Absolutely.
to have a look. There's great stuff there. So, and it obviously there's a lot of similarities to the work that we do in the teacher rural space. So it's fantastic to see that crossover and the work that's being done in that space. I want to thank Ben, Nicholas, and Stacey for joining us today. I think today's been a fantastic session, and it always shows because how quickly time goes. We're just about the hours up. So thank you everyone for joining us. Really interesting content and a lot to take away. So without further ado, thank you to everyone, and I'll hand back to Brendan to wrap things up.
Thanks very much, Morris. Can I also thank today's presenters and also thank those participants who joined us today on a very interesting session. Reminder that the survey poll is available in the chat box. So please complete the survey poll before signing off today. The focus of next week's session, that is the 4th in the winter series, has a focus on student agency. So if you haven't enrolled, please do so. I'm sure that will be a very interesting session. I want to also emphasise that today's session is available online and all past sessions are also available online. So thank you to everybody. That concludes today's session. Bye for now.
Thanks, Brendan. Thanks, Mark.
So much. See you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.